to the next slide, please. So by way of introduction, my name is Gaurav Syal, and I'll be your host today, along with my colleague Yogesh. I look after the AWS business for EMEA in TCS. And while we were contemplating about the digital sessions, and the plan is to have a lot more of these digital sessions, but we decided for the mainframe session first. And the overall premise being that while we talk to our customers, while we talk to the market, we see a lot of need, a lot of requirements for these migration. Typically, for the reasons that they want a faster time to market, they want the cost savings, they want this beast to be managed somehow. Uh, Having said that, we know that the mainframe has been here for about 70 plus years now. And I remember during the Y2K era, the millennium era, there were discussions going on. Will they be able to cope up? The mainframe will still be there, but it's still going strong. Just a quick data point that as per the study, 770% plus Fortune 500 company uses mainframe. 96 out of 100 world's largest bank use mainframe, as well as 23 out of largest retailer, 23 out of 25 uses mainframe as well. So mainframe is here. It has been here. It's still here. But we also thought, as an expert, panel that we have, you also have, by the way, fastest finger first going on as per the poll on your screen. Uh, but coming back, what we also thought was that right now is the era, and especially being influenced, pushed by the COVID, that there is a perspective and need to move towards cloud and migrate and modernize the mainframe applications. While you'll hear through the session, you will hear that we have had success as part of TCS, and we have seen various facets of it. And what I mean by that is we have seen certain customers where we have taken them out and away from mainframe 100% and migrated them to cloud, AWS cloud, as well as there are other customers where we have been able to take certain applications and they have a plan, for phasing out this mainframe. So they are doing in a staged manner. So you will hear all these stories, for the session. For the session overall, what we would have is the challenge what we are facing in terms of legacy modernization. How are enterprise addressing them? And basically, why do you modernize the mainframe? What are the advantages that you get? Along with the industry success stories. Mahesh, if you can move on, please. So the overall session is broken down in three sections, and these are the speakers today. The first section is done by Ollie. Ollie is a senior analyst in PSC, and his research area is cloud, 5G, cybersecurity, and of course, legacy modernization. And what we wanted was to hear from Molly to understand what the market is saying, what the CXOs are saying, like yourself, like the leaders, like you guys who have joined. What are their views about mainframe and how has pandemic shifted their mindset and thought process? So that will be the first section, which will be taken by Ollie. The second section is where Steve Stewart, as well as Dr. Pudley will be there, and they will be co-hosting and presenting this session. Steve is the global head in AWS for mainframe migration and modernization. Dr. Pudley again is the global head in core system modernization in TCS. Both have 30 plus years of experience each. So in all together, they bring 60 plus years of mainframe modernization, and they both have done combining 500 plus migrations. So a very rich experience, a very core rich experience that we have in this forum. Just a quick fact, fun fact that both of them used to be a competitor, in the previous avatars, whereas now they have come together in this session to share their views. The third session is a Q&A session, and which is moderated by Mahesh Jambunathan, who is the global head for legacy modernization in AWS PU, which is our unit. He will be taking your QA questions and moderating it with our three speakers. We want this session to be very interactive, so feel free to pose your questions. My request is that the questions are sent in the chat window, which will be picked by Mahesh. And feel free to send these queries all across the session. So we don't have to wait till the Q&A section come in, but you can share your queries all across the session. Without further ado, I would invite Oli, to share his views and also talk about this beast called as mainframe. Oli, over to you. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you all stay safe.
Great, thank you, Gaurav. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Across the globe, wherever you are, I hope you're safe and well right now. So as Gaurav mentioned, my name's Ollie O'Donoghue. I'm an analyst over at PAC, and I've been an analyst now for about 6 or 7 years, and almost always looking at how enterprises are forging ahead on this path to modernising legacy. My background is in the UK public sector, so I like to think I've got a fairly unique view of the role legacy plays in complex environments. Now, over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be taking you through quite a bit of data. It comes from one of our flagship pieces of research over at PAC, which is called the CXO survey, where effectively we go out and we ask thousands of CXOs across the globe what they're working on right now, what challenges they're trying to solve, the type of things that are keeping them awake at night. And I'll kick off first by setting the scene a little bit here. So this data set here, what we've effectively got is a list of macroeconomic challenges, industry challenges, and core business challenges. And we've asked enterprises to rate how much of a challenge it is for their business. So effectively, this is a list of things that are keeping people awake at night. C-suite executives, it's what's dominating the conversation in the boardroom. Now, it probably won't come as a huge surprise to everyone on this call that COVID-19 related revenue loss topped the list this year for the first time. And that varied by industry and by region. So if we look at industries like transport, logistics, hospitality, very hard hit industries, huge revenue loss, and some of them are effectively out of business and have been for the last 18 months, waiting for that time to almost come out of hibernation. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, where we have banking and insurance as a great example, where you had to pivot some solutions to digital because physical presences weren't quite available anymore, but the actual revenue pressure wasn't quite there. If anything, there was an influx of demand. And we also see this breaking down by region too. So in the UK, COVID related revenue loss is more acutely felt. So about 60% of organisations see this as a major challenge, well above the average of 50%. Just across the channel in France, it's below average, so about 49%. And that's where we see the second challenge on the list. So the specific economic situation in different countries, in the home countries of businesses, how quickly their market is turning around, how quickly their economy is recovering. So if we just pop back to that last slide. There we go. So when we take those two pieces and separate them out, because they're relatively unique, I'm going to try not to say unprecedented, but I almost certainly will say it 3 or 4 times. But they're unique market conditions. We start to see really interesting pieces start forming underneath. So cost reduction and efficiency pressure being a big one. Now, if I'm frank with you, that almost always tops out lists like these. Businesses are always under pressure to reduce cost, always under pressure to be more efficient. Underneath that, we have reaching new customer groups and revenue areas. There is a part of this that's related to the pandemic. Some enterprises found themselves exposed and a little bit vulnerable. They had a very specific client group that perhaps disappeared from the market, and they recognized that, we need to diversify. We need to open up new revenue streams and find new customers. And there's another piece of it where, by enriching products or opening up new communication channels, we can touch entirely new markets, and we can move and find new customer groups and new revenues, which is a particularly interesting piece. And the final one I'll pull, because there are a lot of pieces here that are relevant. So increased competition, macroeconomic things like Brexit, very, very important issue for me here in the UK. But one of the bigger challenges, one of the most important ones, is this need for agility and innovation to address the rapidly changing market that enterprises find themselves in. If you look at the last 18 months, the market has been turned on its head. Enterprises have sort of recognized, we don't have the capability to quickly pitch and pivot our business when these big changes come along. So they're now trying to figure out, what do we need for the next big change that hits us in 2 years' time, and the 100 little changes that hit our market in the run up to that 2-year period. And there are a couple of examples that are worth sharing at this point that show the impact on enterprises when they don't have this agility at their core. One of them is related to the pandemic. I won't name any names because there are actually quite a few organizations impacted by this. But if we look at one of the side effects of the pandemic, which was unfortunately significant unemployment in different countries, a lot of the authorities responsible for supporting citizens with unemployment benefits or a raft of other financial support couldn't cope with the demand. A lot of those operations were legacy applications, mainframe based infrastructure that just couldn't flex with that demand. Many failed for 2 to 3 days. Now, again, we use that word unprecedented. It's sort of unfair to expect organizations to predict this type of impact. But at the same time, these are citizens that couldn't get services off of their government when they needed them the most. And that was due to an IT failure, not a failure of anything else. It wasn't that the funding wasn't there. It wasn't that the government didn't want to provide that support. It was that the IT simply couldn't keep up. There are other examples too, outside of the pandemic and outside of the public sector. For example, an example of a commercial bank that, due to a power cut, their kind of centralized mainframe infrastructure lost power, and it, as these things often tend to be, was on the busiest trading weekend for their customers. So for about 3 or 4 hours during the busiest trading weekend, they couldn't process transactions. Their customers had to turn their customers away on that one day where they book most of their revenue. And it's the type of reputational damage that a lot of firms couldn't withstand a second time, and we'll see that impact play out across some of these other slides. But if we can move to the next slide. Because what's interesting for me is how these top enterprise focused challenges extend into the enterprise. So the C-suite is kept awake at night. They then come to IT and say, you need to solve these challenges for us. And it becomes an IT challenge. So right at the top, again, I come from the UK public sector. This is always at the top of our agenda and our list of challenges anyway, but more profoundly so now, is pressure on IT to reduce costs and improve efficiency. We're also seeing other things start to move up that list, like the changing needs of customers in a digital world. So we're seeing that kind of agility play too in core infrastructure, where enterprises and IT are acutely aware we need to support new digital technologies, new ways of interacting with us, but our core infrastructure isn't capable of doing that, and we need to figure this out. Smooth and secure IT operations. Think of those couple of examples I mentioned at the start there, where that reliability, that smooth, that availability of IT infrastructure becomes critical. A lot of enterprises have seen this or felt it themselves, or perhaps seen it in a partner or a competitor, and they don't want their logo on that next newspaper report saying this system went down and here is the impact that had. And the final one that I'll mention on this slide, because I think it's one of the biggest issues facing the legacy technology space, is shortage of skilled IT workers. Now, this is across IT, we see this issue, but in the legacy space and things like mainframe maintenance, it's more profoundly felt. To be brutally honest with you, I spend a lot of time focusing on this space, but to be really honest, when you speak to new developers coming out of school with computer science degrees, very few of them are saying COBOL is the career choice for me and I want to move into that space. Very few. That talent pool is shrinking, and as it shrinks, it becomes more expensive, which puts more pressure on IT operations to deliver those cost-saving capabilities. Now, there's another great example that I'd like to use here, and the reason I use this one is because I think it demonstrates really well how by modernizing legacy, you can actually take a chunk out of a few of these different buckets all at the same time. So you can reduce cost, you can improve customer experience, and you can open up new revenue streams. Sorry, it looks like we've lost the slides there. But I'll go ahead with this example anyway while those slides come back up. So the example is a bank based in the Nordics, and they recognize that, you know what, we're being held back by our legacy infrastructure. So they went on this mainframe modernization program, effectively cut tens of millions of dollars out of their operational costs. But what they were also able to do is scale more effectively to meet growing demand, and in particular in this case support things like mobile transactions and mobile banking, which was going through the roof, and they wouldn't have been able to do on their traditional infrastructure. So they're able to kind of chew that cost piece, but also tap into new customer groups, perhaps open new revenue streams, and support that changing way that their customers are interacting with them, which I think is an important story. If we could just move to the next slide. What I've recognized is when we ask the enterprise kind of what's keeping them awake at night and ask IT how that translates, we only see really one side of the story. And that side of the story is usually cost, or we need to be more flexible, more reliable. But actually the second side is asking them what they want to achieve. So what does the digital utopia look like? What are your digital goals? And you start seeing some new and interesting pieces come out outside of that kind of that core cost piece. So when we asked enterprises this, we start seeing some interesting things top that list, like enhancing existing products and services. A lot of industries now see this as the core focus. I mean, if you look at some of the subscription services attached to the automotive industry, as an example, opens up new revenue streams for the automotive sector by having digital services attached to vehicles. We're also seeing the optimization of internal processes, enterprises very focused on integrating data and people and systems across their business, really linking the customer right through to the back office and building operational excellence into those core processes. Of course, seeing improvements to digital customer experience, a huge area of growth. And the last one I'll pull out is a lot more emphasis around new digital business models and ecosystems. And again, there's a really strong example of how by taking a chunk out of legacy, building an ambitious strategy for what you're going to do with some of those core legacy applications can touch a lot of these buckets all at the same time, not just one which you see with point solutions and specific investments. And that example is Avis. And if you don't know Avis, they're a big car rental company. And I think this example you'll hear a couple of times throughout the session today. They recognize that to keep pace with the way people effectively go about renting cars, they need to go through a transformation program that involved modernizing their legacy mainframe platform. Now, their online store was called the Rate Shop, accounts for something like 70% of their IT workflow and was growing at about 25% annually. By going through that modernization process, they were able to cut application costs in half, or as an estimate. They saw 20% faster time to market, 99.99% system availability. And an important part for this ecosystem piece, these new digital business models, they're able to bring 400 partners on board to that live cloud. So if you see how we have that one activity, that legacy modernization activity, we've ticked the cost piece, we've seen enhanced customer service, faster time to market, potentially opening up new revenue streams through ecosystem, and also that safe, secure IT platform with availability. Again, they do want to see their logo up there with other firms as their systems collapse when customers need them the most. And if we just move to the next slide. But here's the clincher. So we know enterprises have all of these things keeping awake at night. We know they're telling IT, you need to be awake at night fixing these things too. And we've seen what digital ambitions enterprises have. But there's one thing holding them back, and it's legacy. So legacy apps and infrastructure are holding businesses back from dealing with those challenges and from reaching those digital goals that they set out. In this slide, there are a couple of things that I really want to pull out. And what we're asking here is, how does your existing application estate help you reach those digital ambitions? Nearly a quarter of enterprises fully agree. So they say, this is us, this is exactly us. And 50% say, it's sort of relevant for what we're doing. Say that legacy applications are just holding them back. We cannot reach those digital utopias that we've set out because of our existing estate. Our legacy just won't allow us. It's holding us back. It's an anchor. Perhaps more frighteningly, and it's a slightly bigger chunk of the market, are saying, we're just too busy dealing with our legacy. So we're too busy looking after our existing application set. It's hoovering up all of our time, our resources, our energy, that we just don't even think about new things, new digital technologies, new capabilities, what our customers want. So it's holding them back for even investigating what they're capable of doing. And perhaps one that I think is interesting, given the audience we have here and some of the experts we have, is that a smaller chunk, but still 20% saying it fully applies to them, just don't know where to start. They want to go on this application modernization journey, but in my experience, when you speak to them, they've got decades of IT all overlapping each other, touching things. They don't know if they switch off one thing, what it'll touch. So they don't know where to start, and that's what's holding them back. So they can't even take that best foot forward. One of the most interesting stories in this space comes from Western Union. Again, we'll probably hear this example mentioned a couple of times. But when you look at Western Union and their existing competitive landscape, they're surrounded by digital disruptors, born in the cloud firms, payments firms, all eating their breakfast and have been for the last 5 years. It's been a rapidly evolving space. So they recognize, do you know what? We have this legacy that these firms don't have. They're born in the cloud. They can move really quickly. We need to do something about it, right? We can't just sit here and go, well, it's our time's up. Fair play will hand over the market to these guys. So they went on a sweeping cloud modernization program to boost that customer experience and their services to make sure that they could meet what the digital disruptors were doing, help fend off that competition, help reclaim some of that market. And it's a really interesting example of how, in this case, they were pushed by that competitive threat to just take a jump and go, do you know what? Actually, modernizing legacy is our route out of this. It's our route to becoming more competitive and more successful. If we just move to the next slide. And here we go. So this is what it all boils down to. And it's an interesting piece for me as an analyst that's been kind of banging this drum, I guess, for 5 or 6 years, coming from that public sector background where legacy was sort of a way of life and we just figured how we would go around it. We've started to see application modernization, so upgrades, migration, custom development, move higher and higher up the IT agenda. So finally starting to get the attention it deserves. If you look at some older data sets, what we tended to find in this space is what I would call cooler technologies, right? So the really shiny things like blockchain and AI and all of those cool bits and pieces would be right at the top of the agenda because it caught attention and people liked the capability. They were sold on the dream of the value that it could deliver to their organization. And the core stuff, so things like application modernization, was pushed right to the bottom of that list. That's all changed. We've started to see this critical work, this core work, move higher and higher and higher up that list as enterprises recognize, do you know what? If we're going to fight off some of these challenges like cost pressure, like building an agile platform that can more accurately represent the market, we're going to need to focus on our core. We're going to need to drive real change into our core. The other key point here is that for a lot of the technologies on this list, like AI, machine learning, data analytics, modernizing at the core opens up new opportunities from those digital investments and actually acts as sort of like a value multiplier in most instances to other investments that have been made across the business. So it's encouraging to see we're starting to see some real growth. I've heard from firms and industries that you probably wouldn't have expected to be going down this journey. They would have taken a step back. Mainframe was sort of old reliable. They knew what it did. It sat in the corner. It did its job. But now, as a result of the pandemic and some of the impacts and some of the stress that's put on the system, they've recognized, we need to prioritize this work now. And if we could just move to the next slide. And this is the final piece. And again, this is interesting given the topic of conversation that we're talking about right now, is we're starting to see legacy modernization and the cloud more closely linked together. So when you look at traditional work that you would see in the cloud, things like storage, server capacity, SaaS solutions, a lot of that work's sort of done. When we look at whether it's already realized or planned, a lot of enterprises say, we've already done this work, we understand it, and we're starting to see more growth in areas of legacy modernization. So when you look at the already realized versus the planned, this is an area of significant growth in the cloud space. Traditional business applications being moved to infrastructure as a service hosting environments, for example. Platforms being created for development and testing is another example. And Mahesh, who you hear from later, was quick to remind me the other day that actually that is a really good starting point for a lot of enterprises. They do the testing work and the development work, and that opens up that door for broad modernization. And we're also seeing an increase in data-centric services and the growth of data-centric services, which is important for 2 points. So first of all, a lot of new digital investments being created right now rely on data, right? And we hear all these phrases like data is the new oil and bits and pieces like that all the time, but it's true to an extent. Now, a lot of that data, a lot of that transaction activity is in the core of IT. So modernizing and moving it to the cloud as part of some of those data-centric activities is a critical way of making sure some of those new investments have the data that they need and the insight that they need. And if we just move to the final slide. So I have a habit of throwing a lot of data out there and going through it. So here's a couple of really quick bullet points just to kind of give you the story that I think we're seeing now as we move further and further down this modernization path. The first piece is that COVID has sort of created this tipping point, this modernization tipping point for enterprises. We're seeing it across industry, either as a result of competitive pressure or because of perhaps some of those issues that I mentioned right at the start, where systems just couldn't handle that new demand, and enterprises just don't want to be in that position again, where they're failing their customers at the time when they need them the most. And we're seeing that have an interesting effect on enterprises, driving real transformation into the heart of their business. So real core IT modernization and transformation. The good news is that more and more enterprises are doing this. So they're kind of driving fast and hard down this route. We're seeing more and more examples from firms come out with the benefits and the value that they saw from these activities. And the final point, which I think is really important based on the conversations that I have with enterprises, where, you know what, there is a huge amount of risk here. There is concern. A lot of enterprises go, do you know what, that's the core of our business. If it goes wrong, I'm in trouble. Let's leave it for the next CIO. The good news is that over the years, domain experts, technical partners have developed a range of experience, tools, and approaches that help make this process easier to grapple with and de-risk some of those core modernization activities. And I think you'll hear more of that as we go through the rest of the session. So in conclusion, now's the time to strike. Now, I think we've got time for questions at the end, so I'll hand straight back over to you, Mahesh.
Thank you, Oli. So I will be moderating the next session, which will be an interactive session between Steve and Dr. Parley, and they will be talking about their experience and how we can help you in modernizing the applications. Just before going there, I just want to remind you that there is a second poll which will be up on your chat. So please respond to that as you please. And just also want to add, Steve, do you want to talk 30 seconds about the AWS mainframe competency and what AWS has done as a differential then? Steve?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, good evening, everybody. From our perspective, our customers have been asking, hey, you're helping us with server migrations, but what about my mainframe or Exadata or other legacy architecture are still in the data center? It's really hard to get out of that. And so at AWS, we listened to our customers and we came up with a program. One comprised of multiple things. One is the Mainframe Migration Competency Program that was pre-announced in reInvent in November of last year. And in March, we announced our first charter members, where TCS is part of. These are 10 consulting partners that actually do. They provided proof that they've done 10 or more mainframe migrations, along with 5 tooling partners. And the goal at AWS is to provide access to expertise and tools to address all types of patterns for transforming your mainframe. I do want to state, we're not here to say mainframe is bad, but consider leveraging the cloud for your digital transformation journey. You can, coexist with AWS or transition to AWS. Each customer is different, and so we'll kind of help you through that journey. But TCS is a charter member of our Mainframe Migration Competency Program.
Thank you, Steve. Just before we go to Steve, just want to reiterate what we had mentioned in the beginning, right? A lot of large organizations, banks, retail, insurance companies are still having a lot of legacy, right? And the modernization of mainframe has still been a priority. And we had seen in our previous survey where 70% of the CXOs actually said, yes, this is actually a top priority. It has moved further up with the pandemic. It is not like they have a small piece of legacy. They have a big chunk. Average, they have about 22 applications with about 10 billion lines of code there. So what we are going to do right after this is have Steve and Dr. Parley talk about their views on what is happening there and what are the drivers and what are the use cases and how we can help you move there. Steve, can you give your views on the drivers on the mainframe modernization?
Yeah, I mean,
today. Yeah.
Yeah, so Ollie kind of touched on a couple of these, and there's the thing about putting stuff off, you can only put stuff off for so long. So I always ask my customers, what are your mission critical applications, and what's the average age of those folks that are maintaining that, and what is your transition plan? And if you have one of those, oh no, half my staff is going to retire soon, you need to have a plan. So a lot of those is around business risks and legacy skill shortages that we're seeing. Ollie talked about that. The schools aren't providing those things. But there's some mitigations that you can do with around that. Financial risk, when you go from a proprietary-based compute model to a commodity-based compute model, our cloud is powered by Intel and NVIDIA, AMD, and our own Gravitron chips. So we're able to provide a lower cost for compute to our customers. So that compared to how you normally do traditional mainframe processing are some of the main drivers that we're seeing. But the number one driver, and Ollie talked on this, COVID hit, and you needed to be digital now, like real quick. I mean, it hit, and then you needed to be digital. And then being able to transform your operations to digital has been a really big driving force this year or last year. All right.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah. Dr. Padley, can you give us a view on what TCS has been doing in the mainframe modernization space and how we can help? Padley?
Yeah, thanks, Mahesh. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. It's a great opportunity to be here. TCS has been part of the mainframe modernization journey for a while now. Our modernization COE, we founded it when the Burroughs, Unisys, Control, Honeywell, when they collapsed, we actually moved them to IBM mainframe. That's where we developed these filters. So the point of departure, that knowledge of point of departure is very critical to move forward. So there are organizations which use 100 MSUs. There are organizations that use 50, 60,000 MSUs. So the modernization path, like Steve mentioned, we are not actually planning to push everyone away. They actually have to coexist with the new cloud technologies. We do have the people. We have about close to 50,000 people trained on mainframe. I mean, not just on mainframe. We also have specific modernization experience and expertise to keep them on mainframe as well as to move away from mainframe. And we have been doing research continuously on software engineering and related technologies from 81 onwards. We have spent a lot of effort and energy in building the tools and accelerators aligned to actually software understanding. What I mean by that, we actually spend time and effort in understanding a program. So we parse the program, create the repository, and understand that. So we have built a set of accelerators for conversion, refactoring, as well as actually for program understanding. These combined with an architecture vault that can contain a set of architectures that are readily usable for moving when you move away from mainframes. This aspect actually is getting amplified by joining hands with the AWS. When I say that, in the last actually 6 to 8 quarters, we do see a lot of opportunities and queries coming our way. And we do have a joint architecture board along with AWS. We have fine-tuned all the architecture, whether it is for rehosting or refactoring. We do have architectures that can scale out and scale up. That is one of the critical thing. And aligned to this, we also have a set of partners. Partners for rehosting, partners for refactoring. We have partners like say Micro Focus, Tmax, LZ Labs, Raincode, and we also have conversion partners who actually do conversions from non-standard technologies primarily. That is where there is a big chunk of workload. COBOL is not COBOL when you have C8 Talon or C8 Gen, Visual 8 Gen. So obviously there are actually methods by which you can move away. And similarly, if you have a lot of assembler code, So we bring that contextual experience with respect to mainframe modernization. Like Steve mentioned, every customer is unique. It is like a fingerprint. So when we actually offer this cloud aligned solutions, it has to be hyper personalized. I mean, there is nothing like we can do the same for two customers. So we bring in that expertise in actually like modernizing their mainframe estate and chipping them in parts to AWS.
Thanks, Padli. Steve, what type of use cases are you seeing in the market, and what are customers doing to to chip away or to move away from the mainframes? Steve?
Is that better now that I'm off mute?
Yeah.
Apologize for that. You know, every customer is different, and every business driver is unique to that customer. And so we have to look at what does that customer want to do. But there's a wide range of things that we can do to allow that. I just saw a question in the chat around Big Bang versus phase. The answer is yes. You could do either data augmentation. You could do a phased approach. You could do a Big Bang. All customers do different kinds. And so from what we look at is I like to look at what are the business drivers and what are the impacts for transformation and put them on the equivalent of a Richter scale. If I do this, does it equate to a 10 on the Richter scale as far as for business impact? And that could be adding new functionality to your existing mainframe via DevOps. So transform you from waterfall to DevOps. Or maybe you want to more analyze the data, so you process it on your mainframe and augment that into the cloud and consume it with predictive analytics or AI and machine learning. Or you want to move a specific workload rapidly off through a emulation simulation pattern through our rehost pattern. Or maybe you don't want to stay in COBOL anymore. You want to go to COBOL and C#. Then we'll bring in one of our partners who'll transform that language on over. So all of these are the different types of patterns that we're seeing, moving applications. But, the key thing, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is you have to assess what you currently have. But the key drivers are augmentation. We do see a lot of probably 50-50 between rehost and refactoring. And then thinking new, right? If you're not happy with what you have and it meets only 50% of your app, maybe you need to do a data augmentation pattern, new features and functions or channels and functions, leveraging the cloud for that. All right.
Thanks, Steve. Dr. Parley, can you give your views on the use cases on the modernization?
Yeah. So we actually look at core as three divisions. One is retaining the core, and then reusing the core, and replacing the core. So there are three types of use cases that we see. When we look at retaining the core, I mean have the right core as the right platform for the right workload. So if it does not require that qualities of service of mainframe, obviously we are moving them away from mainframe. Steve mentioned about data augmentation. I will actually come to the data has been ignored all along. The mainframe data, you have actually taken the data and massaged and moved them to ODS for decisions that are taken once in a quarter or once in a half year. That has been the usage of data that was there on mainframe. Whereas today the use cases are different. Like Steve mentioned, you can augment the data. You can have location enriched data. You can actually enrich with 5G, IoT. So obviously, like data augmentation is a key stream where without touching the mainframe, you actually log ship and then replicate the data that you have on mainframe onto any cloud-based NoSQL database or a RDBMS and point all your read-only workloads to the cloud. So we have been seeing this pattern. I mean, this has been on the increase over the last 6 to 8 months. There are more than 25, 26 queries, and there are a lot of POCs happening in that space. Coming to the specific aspects of retaining the core, we do actually see ways of working where we have hybrid workloads coming in. There are Scrum teams with, say, Angular or React, and the newer full stack developers along with a couple of COBOL programmers. And we have done COBOL upgrades in Agile DevOps mode. So Agile DevOps is not just for the newer technologies, it is also possible for the mainframe technologies. So that is one aspect. So if you are retaining the core, identify the right workload and retain them on core. And reuse the core. There you have the luxury of doing regression testing. I mean, like when you retain the data model and the process model, we do actually, I mean, hi, okay, can you please go on mute? There is a, hello, there is a static. Can you please go on mute? If sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So if you are reusing the core, you have the advantage of reusing the code, reusing the data model, and you have the luxury of regression testing. So when you rehost using Micro Focus or LZ Labs or refactor your code, we have Mastercraft refactoring tools in TCS. There are refactoring tools available with players like Anubex, Modern Systems, Blue Edge. When you do the refactoring or rehosting, you have the luxury of comparing what you had and what you have today post conversion. When I say that, you have the luxury of comparing not just the ISO functional comparison, you can also compare against performance, security, disaster recovery, BCP, and all of them. So we definitely like have that luxury when we reuse the core. When we replace the core, we take only the knowledge away and not the code. Code is no way useful. So you are actually taking your business differentiator, the knowledge of the enterprise that is embedded in the code, that is taken out. And we have tools actually, like as part of TCS report, we actually like do business rule extraction, and we actually like repatriate that knowledge into a commercially off-the-shelf product, like say Guidewire or Duck Creek in case of insurance and banking, SAP vehicle management system. There are a long list of commercially off-the-shelf products where we can repatriate this code. So obviously, the knowledge that is embedded in the code is taken, and then we implement them when we replace the core. So these are the broad themes, along with data augmentation, where you can take the data alone to the cloud and then point all your, initially to begin with, we are actually pointing all the read-only workloads, search, validation, authorization, certain OLTP reads, all of them actually are pointed to the cloud. Thereby you minimize the traffic to the mainframe. Plus you also have the enriched data on the cloud. Yes, Mahesh.
Thank you, Dr. Padley. Steve and Dr. Padley, I think this is a common slide. So I wanted to hear from you on the specific application side strategies. Maybe Steve first, and then Dr. Padley for following that. On, how are you seeing application movements? I do see, and like Steve mentioned, people asking about Big Bang and all that. So maybe if you can talk about these strategies. Steve, maybe you can go first, and then Dr. Padley.
Yeah. So again, every customer's journey is different. There's different patterns, like we're talking about right here. Rehost, refactor, maybe rewrite what you currently have, or replace with SaaS type products. These are all viable paths. Each one has a pro and con. The common pattern that we're seeing right now is a rapid exit, as is, warts and all what you have on the mainframe, and just move it off onto a rehost pattern with like a Micro Focus. All right. And then take the savings that you gain anywhere between 60 to 70, 80%, depending on your MIP utilization, and then take that savings to apply to your digital journey, right? But that's if you're okay with keeping that COBOL. Now, I can state that, the reasons why you can't find COBOL developers, that you can't find TSO ISPF COBOL developers. But one of the interesting things that leveraging some of like what Dr. Padley was talking about, the going into DevOps, is that the IDE changes into an Eclipse or Visual Studio, and that then opens up a little bit bigger, with all the plugins and everything, as it, CompuWare has for ISPW and Micro Focus, and even IBM with their ZDNT and DevOps tools that they have for IBM. Using that new IDE opens it up a little bit. Your Java developers can actually learn. COBOL is very simple to learn, so you're able to build from there on that. But the rehost pattern is a very viable. Take advantage of your data is then into in an EC2 and being able to then open it up to the 200 plus services that AWS has. Refactor has pros and cons to that. You can actually get it into a Java or a different language, a C# or Java. But there's a give and take decision that you have to do when you go forward with that. Rewrite, what I would talk about this is that I'm not a big fan of, hey, let's take everything on your mainframe and we're going to rewrite it brand new. That is a longer journey, but you can actually do data augmentation patterns and think about new features and functions that you can put into the cloud interfacing. And the key pattern for that is your integration pattern, right? You're going to be in a transitional state architecture. So you need to be aware of where my transactions are going to be. And please do not go back and forth like this and treat the cloud like it's a hard drive and then blame the cloud because it doesn't work. Well, you have to architect it correctly. And that transitional state architecture, there's a give and take strategy to that. So that's one of the things that you have to, when you talk to TCS or us, we'll bring in best practices for that. Trust me, Dr. Padley and I have a lot of scars, right? This is not a, pick up a little recipe and try to figure this thing out. This is definitely school of hard knocks. And we're graduates of that school of doing these types of work since the 90s. And so leverage that experience for that. But these are all very valid paths. And that's what we see between the refactor and the rehost are the two big ones that we're seeing. Dr. Padley, I'll pass it over to you, see if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah. Just Dr. Padley, I think there's some questions around specific technologies. Maybe you can also add something around, which is there any limitations on the patterns from a technology perspective? Okay.
Sure.
And I think there was some mention about IMS in the chat. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Mahesh. Our experience is you have actually like parts of this in a project. I mean, like this is for a large airline manufacturer where we were modernizing their employee timekeeping system. So rehosting IMS DC, Shadow Direct, and then they have COBOL and DB2. So that is the infrastructure, and they had quite a bit of assembler. Obviously, like the kick screens cannot be used as such. They have been rewritten as for different form factors to be used on a mobile or a handheld or a web application. So and the assembler part again has been rewritten. I mean, we understand the assembler program, what they do, and then rewrite. So if you take an estate and then if you do a modernization, even if you want to do rehost, there are elements that you may have to rewrite. And there is a possibility that you may want to redevelop the user interface. You may not want to keep the same user interface. You can actually you can actually like API enabled and then have better user interface. So obviously there is a mix of this. And before you want to decide on, if you are having a larger estate of multiple million lines of code, very, very essential to map your business processes and the application and have the discovery done. Identify where the interfaces are, identify what interfaces are complex. Say if we have SNA, APPC, I mean, obviously like you need to be very aware of that. And I saw a specific question on are there solutions available for airline industry, whether anyone shut down the mainframe. So you go to the next generation Sabre or that is the way out. And if you have TPF particularly, I mean like the tools and methods available for TPF are very limited. I mean like obviously airlines are adopting packages. I mean like that are new next gen, and we move from TPF based applications to those packages, and these are also applicable for some of the travel hospitality organizations where they use extensive TPF, where the luxury of having a COBOL is not there for TPF or for assembler. And with respect to IMS, again, I mean like it is the same. I mean if you are having a meaningful size, when I say meaningful size, less than a terabyte of data, there are obviously emulation solutions available. But when you emulate, kindly, I mean, like, again, this is a very straightforward thing. When you emulate, the application thinks that it is a hierarchical application. It has the memory of the past. It actually carries the memory of previous births. It does not simply behave like a relational application. like Steve mentioned, you can actually jump out of COBOL to Java or .NET. But then if you have an application, or I have seen programs which are like 75,000 lines of code in one set. And if you convert them line by line to Java, or even you create whatever method, you land up having 150,000 lines of Java code as one big bulk. So working around with them, the ways of working that you imagine for a generic microservice is not available for that type of code. So what I want to convey is, depending upon the method by which you modernize, you have to keep refining them over a while, or identify the right method of modernization for each of the actually like applications. Steve, you want to add anything, Steve?
Yeah, I was going to say that you're spot on, because not everything needs to be refactored and not everything needs to be rehosted. The example that Dr. Pavli just put up there is a classic. Your North Star could be Java, and then you have an architectural team or steering committee that says, justify to me why you're going to do something. The example of, if you have COBOL code that has a high maintainability index or cyclomatic, or has all these nested f-thens, guess what? That's going to generate worse Java. So you need to have a blended approach for targeting all of those things. It's kind of pile on the IMS. What's interesting is IMS is the original NoSQL. That was the original NoSQL to deal with big data. And now we have all this new stuff, Dynamo and Cosmos and all these brand new NoSQL databases, and everybody loves them. But IMS was the original one. And so there's an interesting path that you can use with IMS into these new NoSQL databases, but also an emulation pattern for that, or even transform. We've seen customers go leveraging DL2 from sync sort on the mainframe to then populate that to relational, then do relational. So there's different guys. But the one pattern you don't want to do is an integration pattern of IMS to relational and relational back to IMS. You're going to get in trouble. So don't try to do that. So that's why it's important to have those different types of understanding between the integration points. Trying to see if there's any other. There was a question around Unisys. Unisys is, I've done a lot of Unisys myself, both Burroughs or Sperry, and those integration patterns do exist that you can actually leverage for CDC, FTP, you name it. You can both Unisys, depending on the flavor of Unisys, if it's Burroughs or Sperry, there's different patterns for that.
Yeah, and one has to watch out specifically for MASM, Mapper, and such technologies when you are actually like a link specifically. There are solutions available. We have actually moved from Link to Leon for an insurer in Nordics. So depending upon the technology that is being used in Unisys, that's very important. Again, Unisys is more a brand. You have like you have Sperry. I mean, like you have Libra class of servers and you have Dorado class of servers, and they have varying complexities if it is an airline industry or it is in banking industry. So, and the technology is involved. I mean, if it is heavy on MASM, obviously like rewrite or replace is the only option. You cannot convert much. You can convert to C with a bit of difficulty. Whereas if you have the same difficulty exists for even HP nonstop technologies. If you are using heavy TAL, no, there is a possibility that you may have to go for product replacement only. You cannot rewrite line by line several million lines of code of TAL, which is similar to rewriting assembler programs. So obviously, there are enterprises which are very skewed and have maximum of these technologies. We have seen core banking solutions running on 8 million lines of code of assembler for a small bank. So obviously, like the replacement is the only path. There is no way we can do refactoring or re-engineering. It is impossible. So the only way is actually identify which is the closest product that is available for core banking, retail core banking, and then try to map and move forward. So it depends on the technology estate, but most enterprises do have technologies that are actually like having solutions that we have listed here. I mean, like a rehost, refactor, and rewrite. Yeah, Manish.
Thank you, Dr. Padley. Steve, can you give us a view on the mainframe modernization journey as you see from AWS side and the programs around it? So.
All right. So at AWS, we view mainframe as just another workload, right? So one of the things that AWS brings to the table is that we've done more server migration than any other company in the world. And so that expertise, and if you think it from a Windows server migration, a Linux server migration, at its core applies to mainframe. What do I have? What does it map to? What doesn't it have? What am I going to mitigate? If something happens, how do I roll back? That very high level, or the psychology of transformation. How do you get people engaged? And all of those best practices are applied to our journey. So we do an MRA, which is a migration readiness, to kind of figure out how mature are you on the cloud. It's a different way of running things, and identify those gaps and provide you training. And we also provide assessment analysis through our partners. So all of our partners have access to tools to do their assessments, as well as for mainframe, to then determine what all those things are, and they come up with a pattern agnostic approach. It may be rehost, it may be refactor, it may be both, it may be elimination. We need to understand what are the gaps, what are the things that's lacking. Maybe you don't like any of your applications. That's a rethinking. So we have all of this process that we work through what we call the assess, the mobilize, and the migrate phase. And all of our partners prescribe to this. AWS provides funding for assess and migrate. So reach out to your AWS manager working with TCS on how you can get funding for that to kind of kick off your journey. But let me just one thing. So you do the entire assessment of the entire estate, map that to a reference architecture. What makes sense? The mantra here is, I'm here to duplicate your mainframe. We're here to replicate business functionality. So the example of Dr. Pavli was talking about Massam or Assembler. What's it doing? Is there a widget I can use in Java or C#? I'm not going to transform everything. So look at everything. Is there an equivalent business functionality, or can I eliminate? So like the first thing I try to do is I'm eliminating as much as I can, right? Because I can replace that functionality over here. A lot of these assemblers are utilities that for operators and things like that, you don't need that. So start purging that. Don't put that part of your inventory. Then once you have your plan as to where all the buckets where things go, then you start building your factory. And that's not part of that mobilize phase where you have the different patterns and going through, which is why you need to have governance to do all of this. And then the flywheel starts happening, your factory's moving, and you start transforming everything through. That's kind of really high level on all those three phases.
Thank you, Steve. Dr. Padley, can you talk about how TCS sees the same journey, and what tools and what enablers does TCS bring from a cloud transformation?
Yeah, thanks, Mahesh. Like Steve mentioned, we do work in tandem with AWS architecture team. We do have an assessment questionnaire to begin with. So we actually share the questionnaire. It's a very detailed questionnaire. Based on the questionnaire, we actually enter into a conversation with the IT as well as the business. There are business-led transformations, there are IT-led transformations, and accordingly we look at what is the landscape, how actually is the remediation possible. We identify also components which are, as I indicated earlier, what need to stay on mainframe. If you are having a 10,000 MSU shop, we cannot rehost everything, or we cannot refactor everything. So we obviously have a cloud roadmap established for them. So when I say cloud roadmap, the typical example which we have recently done one is take your development load away from mainframe. When I say that, you be on ZDNT, you have ADDI, and moderate the workload. You need not, if you are actually there are customers who do a lot of development and testing activities today on mainframe, and move the development and test activity alone away from mainframe. You be on ZDNT or on Micro Focus Enterprise Developer and Test Server. There are multiple combinations available for that. So that is the roadmap. That's one option. And the other one is, like Steve mentioned, we can rehost parts of the application for a very large financial services organization who run close to about 200,000 MIPS. We have chipped away in parts. It is not in one go. A replacement by a product, 7,500 MIPS down. Rehost an application, another 4,000 MIPS down. Rehost another 3-4 applications, another 3,000 MIPS down. So there is a gradual descent that happens. We are not like Steve mentioned, again, I want to emphasize, we are not just pushing everyone away from mainframe, but it is very essential that the flexibility and agility that that the cloud offers and the native set of features and facilities available on AWS, they offer a lot of value, a lot of speed and agility. And some parts, if we have to refactor, I mean, like, if it is too small and it need not fit into emulator, or leaving, say, I mean, I just pick this Syncom, Mantis and Supra, or Natural and Adabas. Leaving these technologies and getting into COBOL DB2 Kicks is a burden. Obviously, when we define this roadmap, we look at, like Steve mentioned, look at the governance. How are we going to do the migration in small steps, and how are we going to deliver value at every step? We are not going to do this exercise for continuously for 5 years and after that we deliver something. When we start an engagement, we are expected to do something in the 9th month or at least by 15th month. So the entire roadmap we will be able to define. We will come up with the foundation designs. We have, as I mentioned, we have ready to use architecture walls, ready to use deployable runtime libraries. I mean, for recently, I mean, like 3 weeks back, we could actually like spin up lower tier environments in few minutes for a customer. And for another customer, I mean, like in Australia, we were able to spin up the lower tier as well as the production tier, just the environment in few minutes, actually, which was not possible some time back. When I say some time back, 2 years, 3 years back, no one would have believed that I will spin up a production tier workload for Micro Focus Enterprise Server in minutes. It is just not there. So those are the things that we readily have, and we will build them into this in the roadmap. We have our own assets, and we bring those assets. Yeah,
Dr. Pat, how long does it take to spin up an LPAR? Think about that, right?
Yeah.
All right. How long does it take? So for the audience there, how long does it take to spin up an LPAR? I want an LPAR next week. You have to do the requirements and all that stuff, and you won't get it next week. You'll get it who knows when. And so these are the types of agility that you're able to gain.
Absolutely.
And
thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Mahesh.
Good. Good, Parli.
Yeah. So we do actually have. We talked about Mastercraft. I mean, like this is one of our flagship products. I mean, like it had roots all the way back to 1970s on Burroughs. Later, I mean, like in various forms. I mean, like it was primarily initially conceived as a forward engineering tool, which landed up. We have delivered very large projects. It is similar to IEF Coolgen, but much more user dependent rather than we don't have any libraries. So that was case packed. Then from 80s, late 80s and into 90s, just around Y2K, we had all these conversion filters developed for other conversions, which we started using it for year 2000, and we wanted to repurpose that for understanding the application. So that is how Mastercraft came into being. Mastercraft has the ability to parse and load multiple components. I mean, like when I say multiple varieties of components, the perimeter is not just restricted to mainframe. Even when we do the discovery and analysis, it is very essential. We are not restricting ourselves to just to the core mainframe server. We need to say if you are actually like talking to mainframe server using Oracle forms or a thick client, it could be on VB or it could be on old Java. Java has become legacy. Initial Java programs, those were developed 10, 15 years ago, have become legacy. They are not actually amenable. They are monoliths like COBOL. So we have to understand the perimeter for modernization. Where is my actually ODS? So I have extract ETL, ETTTL, ETLTL, so much activity I do to take data out from IMS or DB2 and build a very old warehouse or a ODS. all of them need to go. It is not just the mainframe. So Mastercraft provides a larger perimeter for analysis. I mean, like it has parsers for other technologies as well. So we can do the application analysis across different technologies using Mastercraft, create the roadmap. As I indicated, this gives a clear picture on where we start. Is my program, is my critical unit complex? When I actually look at the Halstead McCabe complexities, how much of calculations it has, all the details you will be able to understand using Mastercraft. And we can use this for business rules extraction. We are also actually having plumbing code generation, refactoring. So there are multiple facilities available on Mastercraft, including data conversion. So if you want to do area sweep on an IDMS record, you will be able to do it. So you can do area sweep, get the data down, and then you can move it to Mongo or Aurora, wherever you want to. There are facilities available for data migration. So it is a sort of a larger portfolio having transformation and data migration along with the forward engineering tools. So these are the utilities that we have on Mastercraft.
Thanks, Parley. So if you can go, Steve and Parley, would request you to cover the benefits and also maybe make it a little bit shorter, so we give enough time for questions.
Yeah, I mean, the benefits are pretty evident. You know, we talk about some of the cost savings. We talked about the ability to stand up an environment pretty quickly. Imagine being able to stand up an LPAR in seconds. And so the ability of the cost savings of using that type of infrastructure, these are just typical savings. Each one is different. We got to look at your licensing model and how your MSUs are, you know, if you're using prepaid MIPS and things of that nature, but you can safely assume 60, 70, 80% cheaper than what you currently are spending today. And so some of the agility comes in with spinning up like EC2 instances for that, or moving into compute model. The productivity, just the most of the mainframe workloads that I've encountered are still doing waterfall, TSO ISPF on the mainframe, and they haven't really adopted DevOps. Organizations have adopted DevOps for their Java developers, but not for their COBOL developers. Because, you know, if you put Eclipse in front of your TSO ISPF developer, guess what? You're probably not going to like it. But these are productivities, operational resiliency. We can match. You know, if we understand what you're trying to do, we can stand that up. And agility. If I've been trying to do something on the mainframe and my data is now available in the cloud, you have 200 plus services you can tackle that. So tackle your technical debt. So all of these things really apply.
Thank you. Parley?
Yeah, I mean, operational cost savings and reducing the total cost of ownership is the key thing when you are actually chipping away workloads. But definitely there are business KPIs that we actually look for. Ali talked about Western Union. So when we look at a case like Western Union, you do actually have the total cost of ownership reduction is only a byproduct, whereas leveraging the partner ecosystem and onboarding partners in a much better manner, or there is another large financial services organization where we have opened up the exchange rate ping. So there are actually, like when we do a roadmap, we look at both business KPIs as well as the cost benefits. Cost benefits are definitely there. I talked about the airline manufacturer case study. We actually had returns on investment in few months under cost savings or reduction in costs up to 80%, 82% in fact, and 85% for an Australian rail freight operator. So cost savings is the key, but we also look at business KPIs when we do the roadmap, Mahesh.
Thank you. I think considering the time, we will move on into the questions now. So first, I think there are a couple of questions that we wanted to ask Ollie, and then we'll take the questions from the audience. Ollie, I think, can you give us a view on the tipping point? What is the tipping point you are seeing when customers actually move, decide and move? Is there any specific data around it?
Yeah, I think there are a few. And I mentioned them throughout the presentation. I mean, if we're honest, the pandemic's been a huge tipping point for a lot of enterprises. Like I say, the ecosystem effect. Maybe they've seen a partner or a customer or a competitor suffer through the pandemic as a result of their core infrastructure, and that's been the impetus to go on a migration journey. Or it may be that they've felt that impact themselves. Another big area is competition. So we're seeing a huge amount of emphasis on modernizing at the core to be able to meet your competitors out on the field, whether or not they're kind of those born in the cloud guys, digital natives that don't have that legacy. A few enterprises, and again, the Western Union one is a great example of that being the impetus driving them forwards to kind of compete with some of those firms. There's also a customer play. So similar to the competition piece, I think the changing demand of customers. So if you look at banking as an example, mobile banking, new ways of communicating with customers is a big driving force again for that core modernization piece. And finally, I think cost is a byproduct as mentioned earlier, but for some clients that is the driving force, right? They recognize that what, it's expensive now, it could be unsustainable in a couple of years' time. So we really need to start moving now.
Thank you. Dr. Padley or Steve, now are companies moving from the mainframe to more COTS products, or are they rebuilding the same in modern architecture? So what's your views on it? Steve, maybe first and then Padley.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because they're doing it all, right? It just depends. Do you have any value in the applications on the mainframe? Or do you want to go to a package, which means that your business processes adopt to the package or the package adopts to you? Both are costly. If you have a tailor made business process application, but it's just in an environment you just don't feel agile enough, then you can move that. So it depends, and that's part of that discovery. How satisfied are you with the business functionality of your applications, and can I augment that? Can I rejuvenate it? Or is it a total loss that you're just going to have to go? So we're seeing a wide range in the P&C sector. We're seeing a big increase into going to Guidewire for their P&C, property casualty. So there's that. But then, everybody's using Guidewire. So what's your differentiating factor in P&C? And so we have those different types of questions are being asked around that. So it's a wide range.
Dr. Padley?
It depends on the industry again, Mahesh. We have seen even communication service providers, telecom industry. If you are many of them actually have copper lines, and they do have an OSS or a BSS. BSS they have actually moved to some of the recent products, but OSS they continue to live on mainframe or related technologies. There are no packages available for some of them. Whereas if you look at retail, whatever be the segment in retail, we have seen package adoption as well as redevelopment in a massive way. I mean, we have been doing it for several of our customers, where retail as a segment, actually we see both the COTS adoption for upstream and all store facing and subsequent processes, particularly around pricing. We do see people redeveloping them. I mean, like according to their own strengths. The enterprise has certain brand and strengths associated with the brand, and the way in which customers actually like perceive the brand, they do actually do rewrite. And many where they are not doing much of a changes, particularly on the life segment in insurance. We do see rehosting the applications and keeping them. These are closed book applications primarily, which are actually taken for rehost. Mahesh.
Thank you. There was a question about the market size. I just wanted to say that there are probably about 40,000 mainframes out there. And if you want more specific data, I would request you to reach to Ollie for market size data, because we won't know whether we can share it off the cuff or not. Okay, so I'll defer that question. There is a question about how easy or how difficult is it to move all the legacy into cloud, now considering years and years of development, and what type of timelines are organizations what type of timelines do you see organizations doing? Right? So, Steve first, and then maybe Dr. Parley.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a rapid exit, as is. The emulation simulation patterns work. They've been doing it. If you think about it, they were born for, I was a user back in the 90s for, I needed an LPAR on-prem to do my Y2K work. And so these things have matured to be fully functional, and I don't even call it emulating, more simulation, actually compile and they run. So we're seeing a big interest in the rehost pattern to rapidly move that workload over and then rethink or transform. Once your data is onto the cloud and you compile to an exe on the cloud, then in Aurora I can go, okay, what do you want to do? And you can do predictive analytics. You have all the services available to you, and so there's this is a pretty known pattern for that. Refactoring, same thing. You're able to refactor your code and bring that down. There's a higher level of testing for that because you're transforming from one language to the other. And there's test automation tools out there, but that's a bigger effort. So if you look at rapid exit, emulation, simulation, refactor is the next. Then you kind of rethink what you currently have, and then total rewrite, which would be the more complex. So that's kind of like how we see the complexity for that.
Thank you, Padli.
Yeah, so I agree with Steve. It depends on the workload. I mean, if you are less than 2000 MIPS and you are on standard workload, you can plan for somewhere between 18 months to 24 months for the exit. Definitely, whatever I mean, you want to rehost, you will be able to. And there are stories where we have rehosted in less than a year. And there are retailers with whom we are actually working. For one of them, we have shut the mainframe down. In the last 24 months, we have at least shut 3-4 smaller shops. So if your workloads are relatively smaller, the program is bound to actually get over in less than 18 months or max 2 years. Whereas if you are having a very large workload, I mean, we talk about 50,000-60,000 MIPS in a manufacturing enterprise. Obviously, it is not going to get over in even 5 years. It is going to take time. I mean, I think there can be aggression, but in my view, I mean, you should be very cognizant of the business disruptions that are going to happen. So obviously, if you have very large workloads, it is not going, because no enterprise has an infinite budget. I mean, there are restrictions in spending, particularly during this pandemic, we do see. But obviously, there are methods and means to reduce the cost of spending and do some sort of self-spending. We call that as investment spiral. Spend a small amount, start with 500K, and then do whatever is possible. Take $1 million, $1.5 million out in about 3 to 4 months, and then reinvest actually into the spiral along with additional budget. So we have seen this investment spiral picking up in some of the customers that we support, and with cloud, development and test, data augmentation, data archival. These are some of the ready solutions that are available. I mean, we have seen someone having 180,000 tapes. Obviously, upkeep of those tapes, upkeep of the infrastructure, that is actually mind-boggling. So you may want to convert them, archive them in AWS Glacier. We have done it. Similarly, even for databases that are functioning, you can do an horizontal cut and take the data that is mundane, not used, up into cloud. Because we have seen many customers, they have not actually bothered much about data. Many actually. I mean, there are about 75% don't really. So particularly IDMS, IMS, you can take a sweep and then cut whatever is not required, which is mundane, not even participating in any day-to-day operations. They are actually required for legal compliance. Instead of being on a secondary storage, it is there on primary storage in many instances. So there are multiple ways and means by which we reduce. But yeah, we are for a very large enterprises. I don't want to take a guess, but for small enterprises, I mean, we are actually able to switch the mainframe off in about 2.5 years max. Some of them less than 2 years we have done it. So that's the timeline.
Okay. There are two related questions. One is on performance, and second is on, do customers know about, there are stories about customers having to go back because it was not successful. So I think this is an important question. So hopefully you can answer.
Yeah, performance. We actually like. There are instances. You need to actually alter your architecture. When I say that, it is not that straightforward, but there are solutions available. We have seen instances where there is a 7 millisecond response that is expected. I want to candidly admit we never actually were able to match the 7 millisecond. It is 100% electronic. Everything is between subsystems, and there is no way we are going to match the 7 millisecond when you are having the solution on AWS or Azure. But what we have got, it is somewhere around 17 to 20 milliseconds. That is fine with the customer. We are fine tuning it currently. You have cache available on the cloud. Better caching strategies and better grouping strategies will actually bring in the performance. We have not actually mapped sub 10 milliseconds yet, but sub 20 seconds, sub 30 seconds, sub 30 milliseconds. Sorry about that. So we were able to match. There are architectures available, and there we have to do a bit of re-engineering. Where we had performance issues, where we were struggling, where when you refactor and you still want to have performance, there you need to do some restructuring of the some tinkering of the architecture so that you are able to match the performance. Right. The memory in mainframe provides you everything. So in a similar manner, you build up, start of the day, you want to put all the data in cloud, in cache. Then particularly non-manufacturing. Manufacturing is one where we look at this, particularly MES like portfolio. We look at the 5 millisecond responses. Whereas in case of other industries, particularly banking, financial services, insurance, we literally spawn multiple containers. That actually help in managing the performance, parallelizing the process. In many cases, it is on the other side. Say you don't have a nightly batch at all for one of our customer. There is no nightly batch. You just stream the data as and when the file arrives. You just stream it actually. This is right. Yeah. Yes, Steve.
No, I was just going to add on to that. I mean, the reality is, there wouldn't be a migration modernization business if we transformed applications and they didn't perform, right? You don't want to move from something here to it doesn't perform over here. It all comes with planning and the proper partner selection, right? Sometimes you get sold on, let's rewrite everything, and that's where the horror stories come in. But all my battle scars when it says it's not performing the same, because I cannot compete with the I/O and the compute on the mainframe in a transitional state architecture. The laws of physics apply. So if there's a integration pattern that you need to do, and there's a give and take discussion that this is a transition state architecture, I can compete. And Dr. Valley, I'd like to share with you what we are able to do with I/O and compute in the same rack. Now, the challenges you take COBOL and try to refactor it into Java, and guess what? You may not get to that level. Or you have assembler running really fast, where I just saw assembler's fast. It's great. It's not practical, but it's blazingly fast in the mainframe, right? So you have to replicate some of those things. So all of these things you have to take in consideration when you come up with your plan. But I guarantee you, I'll tell you a secret. There's been mainframe workloads running on the cloud for years, right? Amazon is a mainframe class workload. It's available 24/7. It does ordering, millions of SKUs, PCI, reorder, and I mean, you name it, it's available all the time. That's mainframe class workload. So you're able to do it. It's planning, mitigation, risk management, how you do it, and those are the key things to be able to replicate what you currently have on the mainframe to run into the cloud.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. There are a few things. There are examples. There was a request of examples. I think please reach to us. We'll give you examples about specific technologies. Please reach to us. we can assess and tell you what technology will work, what will not work in what situations. So those we will answer. And there are a host of other questions. I think we'll do our best to respond to every one of your questions. If not, please reach back to us. And I hand it over to Yogesh to wrap up, considering we have only about 3 minutes to finish the session. So Yogesh, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mahesh, and thank you all to all the speakers. I think this has been a great interactive session. A lot of questions. I wish we had some more time to take those additional questions as such. Okay, but I think there is a lot to share. What we'll do is we will be sharing this content offline after this session. There are links, as Mahesh said, some examples the speaker covered, but we have provided links in the PPT for TCS customer stories, key success stories, and videos, so that you can go through them and learn from the past experience as such. With respect to the mainframe modernization program, I think this is a joint TCS AWS program. To start with, the first step is the migration readiness assessment, and we would like to offer a half-a-day workshop as an investment from TCS to quickly do a feasibility check, okay, assess your workloads and look at potential use cases that we could plan to migrate, right? And once that is possible, we then plan out a thorough assessment, do a roadmap and a TCO analysis of that workload and a business case, and then take it for execution. Throughout all these phases, there are many funding incentives jointly between TCS and AWS. We work on the MAP program provided by AWS, basically to provide certain funding incentives to cover some of the funding shortfalls that you might have to face in the beginning. So I think we will take care of that to certain extents and help your program to smoothly be launched and take it forward. Moving on, as next steps, I think what we would like to suggest is do schedule a half-a-day workshop with us. We will work out with you on assessing the workloads that you might have, do a quick assessment, a rapid business case assessment to help you understand how we can cut down on certain costs by looking at quick wins and more strategic initiatives that we can take, and help you build a modernization factory. With this, I would like to conclude here. It was a great session. Great to have all of you spend time with us.